Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. This is Laurie Smith on Blog Talk Radio. It is 6 o'clock here in the morning, Calgary, Alberta, Thursday morning, January 20th. This is One Child Abuse Survivor to Another. We're on for 30 minutes. It's a live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com. And chat room is open, and I did pop the link in there to what I want to talk about tonight, or today, today or tonight. And I've been doing so many shows, actually, back-to-back, I'm starting to get confused. I wanted to finish up after the abuse has ended article from mentalhealth.net, www.mentalhealth.net. And that's from Catherine Patricelli, and it's a really interesting article. And there's quite a lot of good articles on there about, domestic violence and abuse and the effects of abuse and child abuse and whatnot. So I hope everybody will get something out of that and go visit that website. There's all kinds of interesting articles on there from all kinds of different therapists and psychotherapists and different people, so it's quite interesting. And so thanks everybody for tuning into my shows. I appreciate it. I'm not a counselor or therapist, just a private citizen paying to do my own blog talk shows. And so I'm talking about abuse, and abuse is a very sensitive subject, and I think everybody should really be aware of what is good for you to listen to, right? So if you feel the show may bother you or make you uncomfortable, you have to turn it off. So it's really your discretion, so please listen at your own discretion. And young people under the age of 18, I just ask that you have permission to listen to my show. You have an adult or someone, hopefully you have someone in your family who cares about you, a parent or a caregiver who cares about what you're doing online that will help you make the decision whether you should be listening to my shows or not. They are really ultimately about stopping child abuse, but there's a lot of adult content on my shows, and I just don't know how young the people are who are listening to my shows. So anyone under the age of 18, I ask that you have someone listen to the show with you and see if it's something that you should be listening to. You'd be doing yourself a favor, myself a favor, and when there's a chat room present, you need to learn how to keep yourself safe. Young people, are really vulnerable, and believe it or not, if you don't have that information and you don't know how to keep yourself safe online or in a chat room, make sure that you do get that information, right? It's so important. You do not want to be a victim of a child sexual predator or pedophile. You do not. So, young people under the age of 18, learn how to keep yourself safe online, right? And in a chat room situation, there's certain things that you do, there's certain things that you never do. And so type into your browser if you don't really know what those things are, internet safety for children or online safety, things like this. It'll bring you to websites that will show you some tips on how to keep yourself safe online, right? It's very important. So we're going to get right into this article here after the abuse has ended. We kind of went about halfway through there yesterday morning, and Catherine Patricelli wrote this article, MA, after the abuse has ended, from www.mentalhealth.net. And she was just talking about the fact that, many people develop all kinds of issues. Not everyone, but people who have been abused can sometimes develop these abuse-related issues, that are hard to get over. Substance abuse problems, sexual and intimacy issues, anger issues, eating disorders. So that's what she was talking about here. She says such problems may occur during your abuse period as a means of coping with the abuse itself, or after the abuse period is over, coping with the abuse memories. So she says then when she was talking about the fact that it's important for people who have been abused to not, judge their healing journey and their suffering, according to someone else who's been abused, because everybody's been in different situations. We're all different, and we've all been through different things. Even though we may have experienced the same type of abuse, it would have been different circumstances and different severity and everything else, right? Different consequences. So, she was just saying that, people should not be judging their own feelings based on someone else's abusive past, right? We all have, anybody who's been abused, pretty much has that in common, sadly enough. But some of us may be farther along in our healing journey than others, and some people they may have gotten help at an earlier age, so they were able to work through a lot of their stuff. And so that's the thing, we can't really judge ourselves by what other people are going through, right? And how they're handling things just because they've been abused, right? Ultimately, all of us are all different, and we all will be at different places in our lives, right? So I think the thing just to remember is just that, we just need to keep working it out and keep holding on, and never give up on it, because eventually, there is sort of a light at the end of that tunnel, which I know for years I never thought it existed. And a lot of people say, well, I can't see that light. That light's not there for me. So in other words, there's no hope. And I used to feel that way too. And I'm really glad that I hung around and stuck around long enough to actually see that is true, and that there is light. But we are ultimately responsible for our adult lives, right? As being abused as children, we really didn't have much choice in the matter. It's not like I was talking about that the other day on my show. I mean, I couldn't go up to my parents and talk them out of abusing me or anybody else now, right? It's not like I could go up and say, hey, did you know that this is hurting me, and I really wish you wouldn't do that, because my parents were abusive. So if I did complain about any of the abuse that I was suffering in the home, then of course I'd be beaten again, right? And that was a real good reason for especially for my mom to abuse me, as if I opened my mouth and said anything about the treatment that I was receiving, or anything that was going on in the home. It was just a way for her to say, oh, now I can really have a good reason to hurt you because you've opened up your mouth and said something about this, right? So a lot of times kids can't, there's no way. We just have to deal with what we're dealing with at the hands of our parents or abusers, right? So, but as an adult, we ultimately are responsible for our adult lives. And if you're in a situation, like my mom had every opportunity to leave my dad, but for every psychological and other issue stayed in that relationship, right? And she made a choice to do that. She had a choice to get out. She had the option, but she stayed in that marriage. And it's very sad because at the end of the road, she could really only blame herself because she was a miserable woman who had just spent her whole life in abuse, right? And at the end of her journey, right, she was on her deathbed and she was just like, this is miserable. What a miserable existence. And even her own children could not bring her any happiness. And so nothing really mattered to her in the end, And it's because she did not take control of her adult life and say, look, I don't deserve to be treated this way, and separate from my dad, right, which she should have done, and gone on to have a decent life, right? It's very sad that people will do that. But then at the end of the road, as an adult, we really only have ourselves to blame if we don't do what's necessary and right for us to heal and to make those choices, right? Those good choices for ourselves. As children, we were just forced to endure whatever we were forced to endure, which is really sad and pathetic, right? But as adults, right, now we have the option to choose to not allow people to abuse us, and if they do, then we have the option, and we really have the obligation really to ourselves and to our children, if you have children involved, to get away from the abuse and get a good life, right? But so many times there's so much psychological damage that people don't make those right choices, right? And that's the problem. That's the issue. It's so incredibly harsh on people. People just like to minimize abuse, and that's why I refuse to minimize abuse on my shows. And I just tell it like it is because I refuse to try to put some sort of a silver lining over it and make it look like it's not as bad as it really is, because I know I've witnessed some of the most horrific stuff in my lifetime from all different peoples, not just my own family, but other people that I knew. And so, this is horrible that anybody should be going through anything like this, right? So if you're an adult, really it is up to you. It's up to me. I realized that when I hit the age of 41, that it was going to be up to me to change this for myself. You know what I mean? I couldn't go back and change the past, and I thought, well, okay, I can't change the past, so what am I going to have to do? Okay, I'm going to have to, first of all, learn how to love myself and learn how to heal and learn how to get the stuff that I missed out on as a child and learn how to self-nurture, right? Because I was never going to have that nurturing that I needed from my parents. It was obviously not going to happen at the age of 45 or 44, 43, you know what I mean? So that's the issue, right? We are ultimately responsible for our adult lives. And so many times, I didn't even realize this until I was 41 when I began my healing journey, that it was going to have to be me to do it. So that's the whole issue. We are ultimately responsible. So that's why my mom, at the end of the road, was just this miserable old woman, because she never did anything to try to help herself to have a good life or her children, right? So it's very sad. So that's where we kind of left off. And Catherine Petrocelli says, it is important to not blame yourself for having been abused, no matter the circumstances of your abuse may have been. People tend to blame themselves for allowing abuse to have happened to themselves, and they may say things to themselves like, he hit me because I was stupid and I deserved it, or I was a bad child and deserved what I got, or I'm ugly or a slut. That's why he ignored me or molested me. These are things that that people who have been abused might say to themselves, right? That it's their fault, and that the reason why they were abused was because they were a bad child, or they deserved what they got, or different things like this, right? And that's true. I've heard people say this, and I know as a child growing up in that, being abused by both of my parents, I kind of did take on that attitude of there must be something completely wrong with me if both of my parents are treating me this way, and all of my siblings. But then I got older, and I just started to realize that I'm not a bad kid. I had something to sort of judge myself by, and that was my siblings, because some of my siblings were really into some bad stuff, and doing time in prison, and doing drugs and stuff like that. And before I started doing drugs, especially before the age of 12, I used to think, well, I'm not a bad kid, you know what I mean? But I was being told I was a bad kid, and that it was my fault that my parents were having to treat me this way because I was just this horrible child, right? And it's kind of sad that people would take this on and say, or if they're involved in a domestic violence situation, they would say, well, my partner abuses me because I deserve it, right? But that's because that's the psychological damage done from somebody who is abusing you physically and as well, or telling you things like, well, you are, I have to abuse you because you are this way, or, if you weren't this way, I wouldn't have to treat you this way. Now, my mom did used to say stuff like that to me. She would say, well, if you weren't such a bad kid, I wouldn't have to hurt you, right? So, and she didn't have to hurt me. Nobody has to hurt anybody, right? It's a choice they make, right? I didn't, like I was talking on the show the other day, I didn't put myself up and push myself into the oven. My mom did that. That's the whole issue. And yet she would blame me and say, well, this is your fault. Look what you're making me do. But it's because she really wanted to hurt me, and she wanted to make it, she didn't want to take the blame for it. But she did, she wanted to hurt me and then make herself seem like not so bad to herself. So she just blamed me and said, look what you're making me do. So that's sick and twisted, when people start doing stuff like that. And, my mom was extremely messed up, you know what I mean? But the thing is we don't deserve any of that. There could be nothing that a child could do that could make a parent want to abuse their children, whether it's physically, verbally, psychologically. It's the parent wanting to take their own garbage out on their children, right? Because kids are kids, and kids are going to, they're going to just be normal kids. They're going to get in trouble. They're going to do all kinds of things that's going to aggravate the parents. They're also just going to be sometimes sitting there playing and doing their own thing and not aggravating the parents. But if the parents have issues, and want to hurt their child, that's what they do, right? Because there's nothing that a child could do that would warrant somebody to abuse them the way that people do abuse their children, right? It's absolutely horrific. It's just mind-boggling why anybody would do something like that to their child, you know what I mean? I sit back and I know the reasons why my parents did what they did, but it doesn't make any sense still, because I'm thinking still, how could you do that to your children, Like, how could you treat your child like that, and just over and over, and it never changed. It never got any better. It just continued on, and you sort of know where you stand then with your parents. I mean, I did. I talked about this on some shows not too long ago, you know what I mean? My parents never said, oh, we just love our children, and then 2 weeks later, beat on us, and then 2 weeks later, oh, I love my children. There was none of that. There was no up and down of emotion playing type stuff, where we thought we were loved for a little while, and then we're not, and then we thought we just knew where we stood with our parents, and it was pretty much a constant sort of, we knew that our parents didn't want us, we knew that our parents were miserable, and we knew that there was a potential for abuse at any point, because they were highly abusive people. So it didn't matter how I was behaving, I knew the abuse was coming, right? So that kind of determined a lot of the choices I made as a young teenager, especially a really young teen, because I started to feel like, hey, I'm going to be abused whether I'm a good child or a bad child, so I'm just going to go ahead and do whatever I want, because it really makes no difference. Because that's the whole issue. I mean, my mom was abusing me for just being in the room, right? Having a look on my face or whatever, this type of stuff, right? And so that's the whole issue. Then I thought, well, okay, I'll just do what I want then, because I'm going to be abused anyway, so it makes no difference, right? So that's sort of, really, so many people can probably relate to that, right? So I have a lot of people here this morning. I have some guests and friends here. Good morning, everybody. And, it's absolutely harsh what children have to go through, but we certainly didn't deserve it, right? So she says here, Just because you say things like this to yourself doesn't make them true. Abuse is abuse. It occurs when someone mistreats another person, ignoring their own wishes and dignity, right? So she says you did not ask to be abused, and you probably had few ways to avoiding it happening throughout most of the period the abuse occurred, if not all of it, right? Yeah, of course. Now, kids can't avoid getting abused unless they just want to run away, which really sets them up for some huge problems on the streets. There was an issue, I used to kind of think about running away, but I also knew that it was not necessarily the best thing to do, because ending up on the street, I actually knew people who were on the streets and their lives were pretty messed up. And so I thought, well, okay, I'm either going to be abused here at home or I'm going to be abused on the street. So whichever way it comes, right? And I actually was very kind of really lucky to have some friends who would let me sleep at their homes and stay with them, and I had an intervention done when I was about 13 and a half, so that did help. But the thing is the abuse still continued, right? It's not like things changed all that much, but it did give me an outlet, and thank God for my friends. I wrote about that in my books, A Life of Death and Redemption, as well as La Vida Juvis. I had some really good friends who were there for me, right? So that's great, but not everybody does, right? And that's very sad, right? It's so incredibly harsh. Abuse is abuse. It occurs when somebody mistreats another person. No child really ever can avoid being abused. If their parents are going to abuse them, they're going to abuse them, right? And that's the harsh thing. I remember going home from school and, always being really uptight about walking in the door after school, coming in after school, just never knowing how my mom's mood would be, right? Then I knew shortly after my dad would be home from work, and I was, as soon as my parents were in the house, it was a problem, because if they were both in the house at the same time, it was an issue because they used to fight all the time. And it's not like they would make up and sit on the couch for a couple of weeks and have a good time, enjoy each other's company, and then the fights would be on. My parents never made up the whole time I was born, so there was a fight going on from before I was born, and it continued on until my mom died, right? So they were already hating each other before I was even born, so that's the problem. So they, I never knew what was going to be happening, as soon, especially once my dad got home. But I had to be careful with my mother, because if my mom was manic depressive, and she was an angry woman, and if I came in from school and she wanted to lash out at me, it was an issue, right? So I was always kind of walking around on pins and needles, just wondering, am I going to get it today? It was just an issue, and I also used to sit at school and wonder who would be dead in my home, because there was all kinds of issues going on. It's very, it's a harsh way for kids to have to grow up, right? And so we can't control what other people do to us, you know what I mean? It's not like we can stop people, like I was saying earlier in the show, walk up to your parents, especially if one parent, whoever's abusing you, and say, I wish you wouldn't abuse me, because chances are that's not going to stop them from abusing you, just make it worse. Because they figure, we don't like the treatment you're getting, I'll show you treatment. That's what my mom used to be like, If we complained because we were beaten, then she would just be like, you want to see a beating? You're going to complain about that beating. I'll give you one that you will never forget, right? And that's how my mom was, just vicious woman, right? But she grew up abused, right, my grandmother was a horrible woman, so it's really no wonder. But is it an excuse? No, it's not a good excuse, right? I mean, just because people were abused and themselves, to go ahead and abuse their own children is incredibly wrong. And that's what bothered me about the whole thing, is that my mom was abused and knew what it was like to be abused, and then yet she would treat her own children that way, and that just made me really angry, because I thought, she should know better, right? Coming from something like that. But my mom just thought, hey, if you can't beat them, join them. So she became an abuser and decided that she was going to control things in her life, and that she was no longer going to be the victim in the situation, even though she still was with my dad. That she was going to be the one to abuse, right? And that's horrible. It's a bad role to take on. And, if the cycle of abuse is an issue, it's a horrible issue, and that's what keeps abuse going. We really have to stop the cycle of abuse, man, because it's not an excuse. I can't condone what my mom did, or say, well, she was abused as a child, so it's okay that she abused me. No, it's not okay. It was never okay for her to do the things that she did to me, you know what I mean? And my dad as well, right? So that's the whole issue. It's absolutely horrible. So she says here, blaming the victim is common, and but it doesn't make it right or an accurate thing to do. You are not to blame for having been abused. So many times people do blame the victim, right? And that's just because abusers don't want to take responsibility, right, for their actions. My parents never wanted to take responsibility for their actions, even though they were brought up on charges, right? They still didn't want to take responsibility. My mom was saying it was my dad. My dad was saying it was my mom. And I got this off my older siblings who were there, who were older, quite a bit older, so they knew what was going on. And they, of course, my mom was saying, "Oh well, it's my husband. It's their father. He's the one that's abusing them." And my dad was saying, "Oh no, it's their mother. It's their mother abusing them, right? Because they were brought up on charges because my dad had beaten up my brother." And, they got busted for child abuse charges, right? So there was 6 siblings in the home at the time, and so the issue is that both my parents were blaming each other, and then the courts found out from the kids, the older siblings, that both my parents were abusing us. So it wasn't just my dad. So my mom was busted too, see, because the proof was there. You know what I mean? So they had the social workers coming in and stuff. So my parents still, even years later, would not take responsibility for that, and always blamed the kids. My mom would say, "Oh, I'm stuck with the most rotten kids in the world." My mom was manic depressive and always talking about committing suicide or saying that she should have killed all of her children or me or whoever, right? My mom was a horrible woman, and so was my dad, right? They would never take responsibility. Just blamed their children and blamed each other, and would never say, "Yeah, we should have done a better job. We definitely should not have abused our children. We should have treated our children properly." They never said that, and they never gathered us together in the room as a family and said, "We love you, children." Like, they never did that. As a matter of fact, my earliest recollections of my home life, from about the age of, especially when I could really start to remember things, was right around 4. But I have memories from before that, some very short pieces of memories that come in. But mainly 4 or 5, 6 years old, was a lot of chaos. And a lot of people getting beaten on. I remember belts flying, fists flying, my parents screaming and yelling at each other, furniture getting broken. And, it's not like they had us in the room saying, "Oh, we just love our children, we love you guys." And it's absolutely ridiculous, you know what I mean, that parents think that they should be allowed to just treat their children like crap, and then what, you're supposed to want to hang around with them and help them out in their older years, you know what I mean? Like, my dad is turning 90 here pretty soon. He's getting close to just almost 89, and he's very sick and he's not really well, but he's mentally ill. And so he's still just as toxic as he was when I was a child, He's just too old to physically abuse me, right? But he still gets his digs in, psychologically and emotionally, right? And of course, they treat you like garbage as a child, right? And then all these parents want you to stick around and do stuff for them when they're old and gray, and it's like, you've got to be kidding me. You want what from me? You want help from me? You know what I mean? I pleaded and begged for mercy, especially from my mother, right? My mother, I used to beg for mercy because she'd be beating the crap out of me, right? And I'd be begging her to stop, right? No mercy, absolutely horrific what people do. Finally, after a while, I stopped begging for mercy. I started praying that she would kill me. I was like, "Oh, Lord, please let this be the last one." You know what I mean? I just, you eventually sort of change your attitudes towards things. And then pretty soon you don't care after, so many years go by of being abused by these people, whoever they are, you just think, yeah, well, they're going to do it anyway, so hopefully they'll just get it over with and make it good, you know what I mean? Absolutely ridiculous. And then these abusers would want us to be part of their life. It's like, this is a huge issue, right? I'm kind of going through this stuff right now. See, that's why it's bothering me. But the thing is why would a parent who abuses their child in any way, I don't care whether it's physically, verbally, emotionally, psychologically, sexually, it doesn't matter to me, why any parent who abuses their child would expect their child to be there for them in their later years? You've got to be kidding me. I don't owe my dad the time of day, right? And he knows this, but he's so old now and decrepit, and he's pretty much on his deathbed that he's just whining away, "Oh, my children, and I loved my children. I just want to hear your voice." He's practically the devil himself, right? The man is so completely evil, sick, and twisted, and yet he wants the world to think that he was just this most loving father, and that he loved his wife and his children. And when he says stuff like that, I just laugh, because I'm like, "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." So this is what he tells people: "I just loved my wife so much, and I loved my children." It's like, right, okay, that's why you did what you did. All right. I see now why you called our mother a whore and a slut, and beat her up and slapped her around, raped her and treated her horribly, and just year after year after year of that sort of thing, just killing her spirit, killing her mind, killing her body. You know, yeah, you loved your wife. That's right. Oh, and you loved your children too. That's why you kicked the crap out of my brothers, beat on them. I think sexually used them, because I kind of saw a few things that kind of made my head turn. And what? And now what? We're supposed to just believe that you were some sort of awesome parent? You know what I mean? Give me a break. So, this is the whole issue, right? I mean, a lot of times people are so incredibly sick and mentally ill that they just can't, what are they going to do, right? So even the rest of this article, that's what Catherine Patricelli is talking about here. She says, nobody deserves to be physically, sexually, or emotionally abused, whether as an adult or as a child, right? And that's just the truth, and I don't mind saying it. I know a lot of people just hate when people say stuff like that, but I really don't care. Abuse is wrong in every way, right? Abusive people are unable or unwilling to control their worst appetites, and I think it's not that they're unable to, because if you study the issues of abuse is not an issue of being out of control. It's an issue of being in control. That's why they're doing what they're doing, to stay in control. They are using whatever means necessary to control whoever they want to. So whether it's the children or their partners, their wives, their husbands, whoever these abusers are, that's how they will control the situation, is whether what they're going to choose to do to that person, whether they're going to pull out a fist, whether they're going to pull out a belt, whether they're going to pull out a knife. That's what they're going to control with. Words, people, verbally abusing their children or verbally abusing their partners, that's a means of controlling. You bet it is. So it's not that they're out of control. I study this stuff, see. So it says they are psychologically ill and or medically ill many times. Not everybody who abuses a child is medically ill, but my parents both happen to have mental issues. But the thing is that not everybody who abuses a child has mental issues. They just choose to do what they're doing, right? It says abusers cause the problem of abuse. They perpetrate abuse on those people around them, and abused people are not responsible for causing abuse. It says that unless and until they become abusers themselves. So the whole issue is that's right. No child could ever do anything to warrant a parent coming in, beating on them, burning them, kicking them around, throwing them out of the house. I don't care. It's the adult in the situation who is supposed to be bringing up that child properly in the first place. You know what I mean? And doing the best that you can, and sexually using your children. I mean, what is there some sort of a reason for that or an excuse? There's no excuse for that except for somebody just trying to placate and their own needs, trying to get their own needs met. Children are not sex toys, right? Well, I was sexually abused by my brother, so there you go. The whole issue is it's absolutely ridiculous that people think that well, I must have been the cause of the abuse, or it must have been somebody did, or it was just me. That is absolutely ridiculous. The abusers choose to do what they do. I mean, I used to tell my mom I loved her. I used to go and steal flowers out of people's gardens to go and give her when I was little, because I obviously didn't have any money to buy flowers. So, I would go and take flowers from the gardens, around us, around these homes, and give them to my mom because I loved her so much. And then to have her bash my head in, you know what I mean, and beat me and kick me around and call me names, and a slut and a whore, and slap me pretty much to unconsciousness. I mean, and I would still yet get up and go and get her some more flowers. I was working so hard to try to get a woman to love me who was not capable of doing that. You know what I mean? It's absolutely so. I really, and we have some sad comments here in the chat room, and it's just so many of us have been through this. So many people know what this is about. You know what I mean? And that's why it's just so important for people to get help and realize that you're not alone, and that we certainly didn't deserve that, right? We certainly did not deserve that, and we deserve to be loved and to be nurtured and to be cared for, taken care of. And so if you missed out on that, then you have to do it yourself as an adult. And that's what I'm working on right now. I've been on my healing journey for about 4 years, and I'm learning how to love myself, how to nurture myself, and how to set those boundaries, and how to do that boundary work so that I don't allow people, in my life to abuse me, right? That I can make those choices for myself, right? So it's so important. So thanks everybody for being here. I really appreciate you spending the time with me here this morning. I'll be back on tomorrow morning, same time, same place, 6 o'clock a.m. And for one child abuse survivor to another. We'll just continue on with these articles here. And have a great day, everybody. Take good care of yourselves. If you need any information I might have, just get a hold of me on Blog Talk Radio or Facebook and whatnot. And yeah, it's so incredibly harsh. So many of us know what this stuff is all about. So, I would say don't give up. Not ever. Never give up on yourself, and we deserve to have a good life, right? And we really have to be responsible to get that and to take care of ourselves. We were not taken care of as children, so we need to take care of ourselves as adults, right? So take care. Have a great day, everybody. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.